On Virus 7, a neutral planet drifting in the desolate reaches of space, the light from two red suns bathed the ash-covered ground, casting eerie shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers. The air was thin and frigid, carrying the faint scent of scorched metal, a remnant of ancient meteor strikes from millions of years ago. This was a gathering place for Death Worlders, creatures forged by the harshest planets, where survival was an endless battle against nature and themselves. Among them, the Clythar stood proudest. With armor like scales as tough as steel, rippling muscles, and eyes glowing red like burning coals, they saw themselves as the pinnacle of endurance, the universe's undefeated warriors. Today, they assembled in a vast hall carved from black basalt, its walls streaked with crimson light from slits high above, to evaluate a strange phenomenon: humanity. Vroth, the supreme leader of the Clythar, stood at the center of the room, his massive arms crossed, his metallic gray scales glinting in the dim glow. His red eyes narrowed, fixed on a floating screen mid-air. On it played a recording from Earth, grainy, shaky footage. A human, lean and wiry, with disheveled black hair, trudged through a dense jungle. Towering trees, twisted like withered veins, swayed in the wind. The screen displayed the temperature, 113 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity near saturation, the air thick with moisture and decay. But what made Vroth tilt his head wasn't the scene. It was the sound. A chilling whisper, its source unclear, seeped through the hall's speakers, as if someone were murmuring just behind his neck. "What do they call it again?" Vroth growled, his voice deep like cracking stone. "Earth?" Beside him, Tarkon, a young warrior with glossy black scales and razor-sharp claws, let out a scornful laugh. "Look at it," he said, jabbing a claw at the screen. "No armor, no fangs, nothing. A strong gust could blow that fragile thing away. How's it still alive?" Tarkon's laughter echoed, but not everyone joined in. Silra, the Clythar scientist smaller than Vroth and Tarkon, with bluish-gray scales and an analytical device strapped to her shoulder, stepped closer to the screen. Her slender hands danced over the controls, zooming in on the human, a man in a tattered coat, his deep blue eyes weary yet sharp. "Don't be so quick to judge, Tarkon," Silra said, her voice low but firm. "I've studied Earth's data. It's unlike any death world we've encountered." Vroth turned to Silra, his red eyes narrowing further. "Explain," he commanded, his tone laced with skepticism. Silra took a deep breath, as if choosing her words carefully for something she herself struggled to believe. "Earth is chaos," she began. "Temperatures swing from freezing to scorching, storms sweep away everything, volcanoes erupt endlessly. But that's not the strangest part. There's something different, something our machines can't measure." She pressed a button, rewinding the recording. The whisper returned, clearer this time, like an unseen voice gliding through the room, making a few Clythar shudder instinctively. "Listen," Silra said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not natural. Not wind, not a beast. It has awareness." Tarkon crossed his arms, his black scales gleaming as he leaned forward. "Awareness? What do you mean, a talking animal?" He laughed loudly, but it died quickly as Vroth raised a hand for silence. "Go on," Vroth said to Silra, his gaze shifting from disdain to curiosity tinged with caution. Silra nodded, her fingers brushing the analyzer. "I'm not certain," she admitted. "But the data shows humans don't just survive on Earth, they thrive. They build massive structures, conquer lands even we Clythar would avoid. And this..." She pointed at the screen, where the human kept walking, seemingly unbothered by the growing whisper. "They don't seem afraid. Or if they are, they've learned to hide it." The hall fell silent, save for the whisper echoing from the recording, like a call from the shadows. Vroth crossed his arms tighter, his scales clicking as he tilted his head. "If Earth's that dangerous," he said slowly, "why don't they have armor? No claws? What keeps them alive?" The question hung in the air, unanswered for a moment. Tarkon smirked, still unconvinced. "Maybe they're just crazy," he said, "surviving on luck until that planet swallows them whole." But Silra shook her head. Her eyes locked on the screen. "No," she whispered. "There's something we don't understand. Something bigger." Suddenly, the recording cut off, the screen going black. The whisper vanished, leaving a heavy stillness. The Clythar exchanged glances, some annoyed, some intrigued. Vroth stepped closer to the screen, his red eyes probing the darkness as if to pierce it. "If humans are so weak," he said, his voice dropping, "why were they invited here? Someone explain." Silra turned to him, hesitant. "Because they requested to meet us," she said. "They claim Earth isn't just a threat to them. It could be to all of us." Before Vroth could reply, the massive stone door of the hall rumbled and slid open. A cold gust swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth and metal. Two figures stepped through, tiny compared to the towering Clythar warriors. The one in front was a man, his tattered coat fluttering in the breeze, black hair mussed over half his face, but his piercing blue eyes blazed like fire in the dark. Behind him was a woman, petite, brown hair tied back, clutching an old recording device. Tarkon laughed, the sound bouncing off the walls. "Look at that," he mocked. "Two prey animals just walked into our jaws." But Vroth didn't laugh. He stared at the man, a flicker of unease rising in his chest. There was something in his eyes, not arrogance, not fear, but a terrifying calm, as if he'd seen things even the Clythar couldn't fathom. The man stepped forward, his voice ringing out, deep and clear, cutting through Virus 7's icy air. "I'm Kael Revel," he said, speaking flawless Clythar without a translator. "And we're here to warn you. Earth isn't what you think. If you don't listen, we'll all pay the price." A faint whisper rose from the device in the woman's hands, soft but sharp, like an invisible blade slicing through the room. The hall sank into silence again, but this time, no one dared to laugh. The stone door thudded shut behind Kael Revel and the small woman with him, the sound of grinding rock, a low growl that severed the cold wind from outside. The hall on Virus 7 fell into a thick hush, broken only by the faint whisper from the battered recording device in the woman's hands. Lyra Vex, as Silra quickly recalled from prior data. The whisper wasn't loud, but it slithered through the space, an invisible thread coiling around each Clythar, making their scales quiver instinctively. Vroth stood motionless, his red eyes locked on Kael. He said nothing, but his silence was more menacing than any threat. Tarkon, however, couldn't hold back his contempt. He took a step forward, his claws scraping the stone floor, sparking faintly. "Warn us?" he snarled, voice dripping with mockery. "Who do you think you are, human, barging in here? A weak little prey with big words?" Kael didn't answer immediately. He stood there, hands loose at his sides, his torn coat swaying in the lingering chill from the closed door. His blue eyes swept the room, from Vroth to Tarkon, then resting on Silra, who gripped her analyzer like it was her lifeline. "I'm not here to challenge you," Kael finally said, his voice steady and low, unshaken. "I'm here to tell the truth. Earth isn't just dangerous because of volcanoes or storms. Something lives in its shadows, something you've never faced." He paused, letting his words sink in. The whisper from Lyra's device sharpened, not louder but keener, like a needle pricking every ear in the room. Vroth tilted his head, his gray scales catching the dim light as he stepped closer to Kael, each footfall a hammer on stone. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice deep and cutting, testing if Cale dared lie. Before Cale could respond, Lyra stepped forward, her hands trembling as she raised the recorder high. "It doesn't have a name," she said, her voice hoarse, as if dragging each word from a dark corner of her mind. "We call it the Whisperer because that's how it starts, a small, harmless sound, until it gets inside your head." She pressed a button, and the whisper flooded out, clearer now. A string of wordless tones, icy, like wind through an abandoned cave, yet carrying a distinct awareness, as if searching for something. Tarkon laughed, though it sounded forced. "A sound?" he scoffed, tapping his claws on the floor. "You think we're scared of a noise? Clythar have faced beasts that could rip you apart with one bite. What's this thing supposed to do to us?" But Sailra didn't laugh. She moved closer to Lyra, her gray-blue eyes glinting with curiosity and unease. "Let me see," she said, almost commanding. Lyra hesitated, glancing at Cale for approval. He nodded slightly, and she handed over the device. The Clythar scientist plugged it into her own gear, a small screen on her shoulder lighting up with jagged sound waves. "This isn't natural," Silra whispered, her voice quivering as she read the data. "It has structure, like a signal, but it's not from any machine or living thing we know." Vroth turned to Silra, his red eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone dropping, edged with newfound wariness. Silra inhaled deeply, her fingers tracing the screen. "It's like a consciousness," she said, "but without a body. No clear origin. It just exists." She looked up at Cale, her gaze brimming with questions. "How do you survive this?" Cale gave a faint smile, devoid of joy. "We don't just survive," he said. "We've learned to face it, but the cost is steep." Lyra bowed her head, her hands clenching the torn edges of her suit. "I've seen it," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned by the device's murmur. "I heard it, in a cave deep underground. I thought it was just wind until it spoke to me. Not with words, but with images. With fear. It wanted me to set it free." She lifted her eyes, haunted. "And I did." The hall fell silent again, but this time it was a different silence, not doubt, but unease. Tarkin crossed his arms, his claws stilled. He looked at Lyra, then Cale, his fierce gaze now tinged with suspicion. Vroth stepped closer, his towering form blocking the red light from the wall slits. "You say Earth's a threat to us," he said, his voice a distant rumble. "But why should we trust you? A species with no armor, no claws, carrying a machine that makes weird noises. How do we know this isn't a trick?" Cale met his stare, unflinching. "Because I've survived it," he said, "and because it won't stop at Earth. It knows about you now, through us. If you don't believe me, I'll prove it." Tarkon lunged forward, his black scales gleaming as he pointed a claw at Cale. "Prove it?" he snarled. "You want to test the Clythar? I'll show you the difference between a warrior and a liar." But before Tarkon could charge, Vroth raised a hand to stop him, his eyes never leaving Cale. "Hold on," he said, his voice cold as stone. "If you're telling the truth, human, show us. But if this is a ruse, you won't leave Virus 7 alive." Cale nodded, unshaken. "Fine," he said, "but not with fists. You want to know how we survive? I'll let you feel it, what we face every day." He turned to Lyra, signaling her. She pressed a button, and the whisper surged, no longer faint but swelling, like an invisible wave washing over the hall. It wasn't just sound, it carried a sensation, a weight pressing on the mind, as if someone watched from the shadows. Silra stepped back, her shoulder device flashing wildly. Tarkon gritted his teeth, claws clenching. Even Vroth, with all his might, tilted his head slightly, as if shaking off an unbidden thought. "This is just the beginning," Kale said, his voice slicing through the whisper like a blade. "And if you don't believe me, get ready, because it came here with us." The whisper filled the hall on Virus 7, no longer a vague hum but a palpable wave, pressing down on every Clythar in the room. It didn't just echo in their ears, it wormed into their minds, a cold hand groping in the dark. Silra recoiled, her analyzer flashing chaotically, sound waves twisting into bizarre shapes on the screen, as if it were screaming. Tarkon clenched his jaws, his glossy black claws digging into the basalt floor, leaving scratches. Vroth stood still, his red eyes narrowed, but his metallic gray scales trembled faintly, a rare sign of unease. Kale Revel, at the center, remained calm, his blue eyes gleaming in the dim red light from the wall slits. Lyra Vex, beside him, clutched the recorder, her hands shaking but her gaze steady, as if accustomed to this dread. "You say we'll feel it?" Tarkon roared, his voice cutting through the whisper, though it couldn't hide the tremor within. He lunged toward Kale, claws raised as if to tear him apart. "I'm not afraid of a sound. Prove it now!" Kale looked at Tarkon, unperturbed. "All right," he said, his tone low and icy. "But not here. If you want the truth, follow me." He turned to Vroth, his gaze challenging yet not arrogant. "There's a room on Virus 7, isn't there? A place you use to test those who dare face the Clythar. Take me there, and I'll show you." Vroth tilted his head, his red eyes studying Kale, weighing whether this was bravery or folly. "The dark chamber," he said slowly, his voice like fracturing rock. "It's not for the weak. Are you sure, human?" Kale nodded without hesitation. "I've survived worse." Tarkon laughed, though it rang hollow. "Good," he said, claws tapping the floor. "I'll go with you. Let's see how long you last before begging to get out." Vroth raised a hand, silencing the others. "Fine," he said. "But if you fail, human, don't expect to leave." A stone door at the hall's rear slid open, revealing a narrow corridor plunging deep into Virus 7. The air from within rushed out, icy and damp, smelling of rot and scorched metal. Kale led the way, Lyra trailing him, the recorder in her hands still emitting its ceaseless whisper. Vroth, Tarkon, and Silra followed, their heavy steps reverberating in the tight passage. The hall's red light faded, giving way to thick darkness, pierced only by faint beams from Silra's device, casting eerie patterns on the mottled stone walls. The corridor ended at a round door etched with ancient Clythar symbols, icons of strength and survival. Vroth pressed his hand to it, his scales clicking as he pushed it open. A cold gust blew out, heavy with an oppressive weight, as if the space inside were breathing. The dark chamber wasn't large, but its darkness seemed infinite. The black stone walls devoured light, reflecting nothing. At the center stood a stone pedestal, where Silra placed Lyra's recorder at Kale's direction. "Turn it on," Kale said, his voice low but sharp. Lyra hesitated, glancing at him. "You sure?" she whispered. "Last time we did this." Kale rested a hand on her shoulder, his gaze softening briefly. "I know, but they need to see." Lyra took a deep breath, pressed the button, and the whisper erupted, no longer restrained by the hall's expanse. It echoed in the chamber, growing louder, sharper, a sonic tide crashing against the walls and surging back, enveloping them all. Tarkon strode to the room's center, claws raised as if ready to fight. "This is your test," he snarled, glaring at Kale. "A noise? I'll show you Clythar fear nothing." He slammed a fist into the pedestal, the impact drowning the whisper for a split second. But then the darkness shifted. It wasn't still anymore. It moved, a thick black mist coiling around Tarkon's legs, around Kale, around everything. Silra stepped back, her device flashing unreadable data. "This isn't light bending," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's aware." Vroth stood at the threshold, his red eyes narrowed. But he didn't enter, not from fear, but to observe. The whisper ceased being mere sound. It carried visions, fragments of memories not theirs. Tarkan saw himself in an earth jungle, trees twisted like dried veins, and an unseen shape moved in the shadows, whispering in his ear. "You're strong," it said, not in words but in feeling. "But I'm stronger." Tarkan roared, slashing at the air, hitting only darkness. He spun to Kale, his fierce eyes now wild with panic. "What are you doing?" he shouted. Kale stood a few steps away, hands loose, his gaze icy. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "This is what we face. It doesn't attack with claws. It attacks the mind." The darkness tightened around Tarkan, and the whisper became a chaotic chorus, hundreds of voices speaking at once. He saw more, giant beasts with razor jaws, storms tearing the world apart, then a deep cave where Lyra once stood, trembling as she touched an ancient slab. "Open the way for me," the whisper urged, and Tarkan felt a crushing weight on his chest, as if something squeezed him from within. He roared, charging at Kale, claws high, but Kale sidestepped smoothly, as if used to such assaults. "Don't fight it," Kale said, his voice piercing the whisper. "It wants you to fear. Don't give it what it wants." Tarkan collapsed, claws raking the floor, carving deep gouges. He panted, his red eyes dimming with panic. How do you stand it?" he growled, voice faint. Kale knelt beside him, not touching, but his gaze softened. "Because I've learned to listen without letting it control me," he said. "It's not stronger than our will unless we let it win." The whisper faded abruptly, as if Kale's words pushed it back. The darkness retreated, settling into stillness, but no one relaxed. Vroth stepped in, his red eyes flicking from Tarkan to Kale. "What did you do?" he asked, his tone deep with veiled awe. Kale stood, brushing dust from his torn coat. "I showed you," he said. "This is what we live with every day. Not physical strength, not armor or claws, but will. If you think this is a trick, ask Tarkan how he feels." Tarkan rose, his claws trembling as he steadied himself. He said nothing, but his eyes, once fierce, now reluctant with respect, spoke volumes. Silra approached, her device still flashing, her voice steadier. "The data shows. It's not an illusion," she said. "It's real, even if just a fragment." She looked at Kale, questioning. "How do you survive this?" Kale gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "We don't always," he said, "but we've learned to fight. Not with fists, but with our minds. And now it's not just our problem anymore." The dark chamber. On Virus 7 sank into a heavy silence after the ordeal. The darkness had receded, no longer writhing like a living thing, but its oppressive weight lingered, a cold breath on the nape of the neck. Tarkan stood, his black claws shaking as he braced against the stone floor, deep scratches marking his panic. His red eyes dulled, the fierceness replaced by a quiet unease. Vroth stood at the threshold, arms crossed, his gray scales glinting faintly under Selra's device light. He said nothing, but his red gaze shifted from Tarkan to Kyle Revel, reassessing the small human before him. Silra, the Clythar scientist, bent near Lyra's recorder, her slender fingers tracing the analyzer screen, her gray-blue eyes alight with curiosity and fear. "It's not an illusion," she repeated, her voice shaky. "It's real. But how? How do you survive this?" Kale turned to Silra, his blue eyes piercing the gloom, his faint smile heavy with sorrow. "We don't always," he said again, his voice low and slow, each word drawn from a painful memory. He stepped to the pedestal, where the recorder still emitted a faint whisper, now just background noise, stripped of its earlier power. But we've learned to fight, not with physical strength, but with something you might not know. Will, cooperation, and sometimes sacrifice. He glanced at Lyra, his gaze softening. Tell them, Lyra. They need the truth. Lyra Vex took a deep breath, her small hands gripping the torn edges of her suit. She stepped near the pedestal, Sylra's light catching her tense features and haunted brown eyes. I'm an archaeologist, she began, her voice raspy, as if pulled from a deep abyss in her mind. 3 years ago, I led a team into a cave in Antarctica, buried under ice for millions of years. We found a slab, unlike anything I'd seen. It wasn't natural stone, it was carved, but not by human hands. The symbols on it, they moved, like they were alive. She paused, her trembling hands wrapping around herself, as if the chill of that memory still clung to her. Vroth tilted his head, his scales clicking as he entered the room, his massive frame blocking the corridor's light. A slab? He asked, his voice deep and sharp. You're saying this came from that? Lyra nodded, avoiding his gaze. I thought it was just a relic, she went on. But when I touched it, I heard the whisper, not in my ears, but in my head. It didn't speak words, but images, feelings. I saw cities swallowed by darkness, giant creatures falling without wounds, and then me, standing in the cave, opening its way. She bowed her head, her voice fading. I didn't know what I'd done until it was too late. The whisper told me to break the slab, and I did. When it shattered, darkness poured out, not smoke, not gas, but something alive. It killed my team one by one, not with claws, but with fear. They tore each other apart, or stood still until their hearts stopped. The chamber grew quiet, the recorder's whisper echoing like a reminder of Lyra's tale. Tarkon, near the pedestal, clenched his jaws, his claws tightening. And you survived? He growled, skeptical. Lyra met his eyes. Not because I was stronger, she said. Kale pulled me out. He came when he heard we'd lost contact. He walked into that cave, faced it, and somehow he survived. She turned to Kale, her gaze a mix of gratitude and fear. I don't know how. Kale stepped closer, resting a hand on Lyra's shoulder in comfort. I'm not stronger than it, he said, his voice deep and clear, cutting through the chamber's heavy air. I just learned not to let it win. When I entered the cave, I heard the whisper. It tried to invade my mind, showing me the worst. My family dying, Earth consumed, myself broken. But I realized something. It can't force me to act if I don't allow it. It feeds on fear, on panic. If you stay calm, if you refuse to obey, it loses power. He faced Vroth, his gaze icy. That's how we survive on Earth. Not because we're stronger than you, but because we've faced what physical strength can't touch. Sylra approached, her device still flashing whisper data. But what is it? She asked, her voice thick with scientific curiosity. No body, no clear origin. Where did it come from? Kale's faint smile held no warmth. We don't know for sure, he said. Maybe it's ancient, buried before humans existed. Maybe it's a different kind of life, one that doesn't need a form. But we know this. It's not content being trapped. When Lyra broke the slab, it escaped, and now it's seeking to spread, not just on Earth, but across the universe. Vroth crossed his arms, his red eyes narrowing as he studied Kale. And you think it's here? He asked, his voice lowering, tinged with caution. Kale nodded. Not all of it, he said. Just a sliver through this device. But that's enough for it to sense you. It doesn't care if you're Clythar or human. It wants control, wants to grow. If we don't stop it, Virus 7 is just the start. Sylra bent over the recorder, her fingers tracing the analyzer screen. The data backs him up, she said, steadier but still shaky. The whisper has structure, like a signal, but it shifts. like it's learning, adapting. If it's stronger on Earth, then... She looked up at Vroth. We can't ignore this. Tarkon, now upright, his claws steady, still bore unease in his eyes. So what do you do with it? He asked, his tone softer, no longer mocking. If it can't be killed with claws, how do you beat it? Kale met Tarkon's gaze, then Vroth's, his eyes burning with grim resolve. We haven't beaten it, not yet, he said. We keep it on Earth, sealing the cave, living with it. But every day it grows stronger, and we can't do it alone forever. That's why we're here, not to boast, but to find allies. You have strength we lack. We have experience you need. Together, we can stop it. The whisper spiked briefly, as if reacting to Kale's words. Lyra flinched, hands clutching her head, but Kale steadied her with a touch. It doesn't like being talked about, he murmured, a warning and reassurance in one. Vroth stepped to the pedestal, his red eyes fixed on the device. If it's as dangerous as you say, he rumbled, why not destroy it now? Kale shook his head. Because you can't, he said. Not the way you're used to, but if you're willing to listen, I'll show you how we do it. The dark chamber on Virus 7 fell into a thick silence after Kale Revel's final words. The whisper from Lyra Vex's recorder lingered, now faint, like a distant breath, as if the whisperer were listening, biding its time. Vroth, the Clythar leader, stood before the pedestal, his red eyes locked on Kale, his gray scales glinting in the dim glow of Sylra's device. Tarkon, now upright, his black claws steady, still carried an unfamiliar unease in his gaze. Sylra bent over her analyzer, slender fingers tracing the screen, her gray-blue eyes flickering with curiosity and caution. Lyra stood beside Kale, her small hands gripping her torn suit, her haunted brown eyes resolute. No one spoke for a long moment, each weighing the revelations just shared. Vroth broke the stillness, his voice a low thunder rolling through the cramped space. You say we can't destroy it, he said, eyes narrowing at Kale. But you also say we need each other. Why should the Clythar ally with a weak species like yours? We have strength, armor, claws, things you lack. Kale's faint smile held no arrogance, only cold patience. Because your strength isn't enough, he replied. You saw Tarkon in the dark. He's 100 times stronger than me, yet he fell. This thing doesn't care about armor or claws. It strikes the mind, and that's where we have experience you don't. Tarkon clenched his jaws, claws scraping the stone lightly, but he didn't argue. He glanced at Vroth, his gaze a mix of respect and reluctance, as if admitting Kale was right. Sylra looked up from her device, her voice calm but firm. The data supports him, she said. The whisper grew stronger when Tarkon panicked. It thrives on fear. If we're to face it, we need more than physical power. We need their way. She fixed Kale with a questioning stare. But how? How do you contain it? Ael nodded to Lyra, urging her on. She took a deep breath, her raspy voice steady. After I broke the slab, she said, Kale and others came. They couldn't kill it, but they found a way to trap it, building a new tomb around the cave, using will to push it back. We worked together. No one acted alone. One person isn't enough, but many, united, can hold it there. She paused, eyes dropping to the floor. But it doesn't sleep. It keeps whispering, keeps trying to break free. Vroth crossed his arms, his scales clicking as he tilted his head. And now it knows us, he said, his voice deepening. You brought it here, human. Why shouldn't we kill you now to end the threat? Kale stepped closer to Vroth, fearless, his blue eyes meeting the red glare head-on. Because killing me won't stop it, he said. It's felt you through this device. It doesn't need me to reach here. It just needs a crack. And Virus 7 could be that crack if you don't act. We didn't bring it to threaten you. We brought it to warn you, to stop it together. The chamber grew quiet again, the faint whisper a constant reminder of the unseen danger. Tarkon stepped forward, claws relaxed, his voice softer, no longer brash. If we work together, he said, then what? What do we do with something unkillable? Kale's gaze softened slightly. We don't need to kill it, he said. We need to understand it, to keep it caged. You have the power to build unbreakable tombs. We know how to silence it. Together we can protect not just Earth, but Virus 7 and beyond. Vroth stood motionless, his red eyes scanning Kale, then Tarkon, Sailra, and Lyra. He wasn't one to bend easily, but the Dark Chamber's events, Tarkon's panic, Kale's calm, Sailra's data, couldn't be dismissed. This will be a test, he said at last, his voice deep and firm. Clythar bow to no one, but we're not fools to ignore a threat. If you're truthful, human, we'll cooperate, on our terms. We won't abandon our ways. Kale nodded without hesitation. I'm not asking you to change, he said. I'm asking you to expand your strength. Together, we're greater. Vroth extended a hand, a rare Clythar gesture of respect and agreement. Kale took it, his small hand gripping the steel-hard scales. May this alliance make us stronger, Kale said, his voice low but clear. Vroth nodded slowly. May it be enough to keep the darkness where it belongs, he replied. They left the dark chamber, Vroth's massive form leading, followed by Tarkon, Sailra, Kale, and Lyra. The whisper from the device faded as Sailra switched it off, but as they entered the corridor, another sound arose, soft, distant, like wind through stone. Lyra halted, her hands trembling as she glanced back into the chamber's gloom. Did you hear that? She whispered to Kale. He nodded, his blue eyes narrowing. It's not in the device, he said, his voice so low only she heard. It's here. They emerged into the main hall, where red light from Virus 7's twin suns streamed through the slits, but the whisper lingered faintly, its source unclear, a final warning. The Clythar and humans had forged an alliance, but in the universe's shadows, the Whisperer waited, patient and cunning, poised to find a new crack.